After World War II, Korea, previously under Japanese rule, found itself at a crossroads. The Allied victory over Japan brought hope for independence, but it also sowed the seeds of division. In 1945, the Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union administered the north, while the United States administered the south. This division, intended as a temporary measure, quickly solidified into a hardened political reality. Two states emerged: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, led by Kim Il-sung, and the Republic of Korea in the south, led by Syngman Rhee. Both leaders harbored aspirations of unifying the peninsula under their respective ideologies, setting the stage for a devastating conflict. The division of Korea reflected the broader geopolitical tensions of the emerging Cold War. The Soviet Union sought to expand its sphere of influence in East Asia, while the United States aimed to contain the spread of communism. Korea, caught in the middle of this ideological struggle, became a proxy battlefield for the two superpowers. The Korean War, therefore, was not simply a civil war between two Korean states. It was a conflict with global implications, drawing in major powers and shaping the course of the Cold War. The Korean War unfolded against the backdrop of escalating tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War, characterized by ideological rivalry, mistrust, and a constant threat of nuclear war, cast a long shadow over international relations. Both superpowers engaged in a global struggle for influence, supporting allies and seeking to undermine their adversaries. The division of Korea, therefore, became a focal point of this rivalry, with each side backing its respective Korean ally. The Korean War also highlighted the dangers of proxy wars, in which major powers support and arm opposing sides in a conflict without directly engaging each other militarily. This indirect confrontation allowed the superpowers to avoid a direct military clash, which could have escalated into a nuclear conflict. However, proxy wars also had devastating consequences for the countries involved, as they became battlegrounds for conflicts that were not entirely their own. The Korean War, in this sense, served as a tragic example of the human cost of Cold War geopolitics. On June 25, 1950, the fragile peace on the Korean peninsula shattered. The North Korean People's Army, armed with Soviet tanks and artillery, launched a surprise attack across the 38th parallel. The invasion caught the South Korean army off guard, and the KPA made rapid advances southward, capturing the South Korean capital, Seoul, within days. The North Korean leadership, emboldened by its early successes, believed that it could achieve a swift victory and unify Korea under communist rule. The South Korean army, although outnumbered and outgunned, put up fierce resistance. However, the KPA's superior firepower and the element of surprise proved decisive in the early stages of the war. The United States, caught off guard by the North Korean invasion, quickly mobilized its military forces and sought international support for intervention in the conflict. The North Korean invasion of South Korea triggered international condemnation and prompted a swift response from the United Nations Security Council. With the Soviet Union boycotting the Security Council in protest of the UN's refusal to recognize the People's Republic of China, the United States secured a resolution authorizing the use of force to repel the North Korean aggression. A UN-led coalition consisting primarily of US forces was assembled to aid South Korea. The UN intervention marked a turning point in the Korean War. The arrival of US troops, along with air and naval support, bolstered the beleaguered South Korean forces and helped to slow the North Korean advance. However, the UN forces faced a formidable enemy in the KPA, which was well-equipped, highly motivated and fighting on familiar terrain. The Korean War was about to become a major international conflict. Section 5. Turning the tide at Incheon. By August 1950, the North Korean offensive had pushed UN and South Korean forces into a small defensive perimeter around the port city of Busan in the southeastern corner of the Korean peninsula. The situation appeared dire for the UN forces, but General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of UN forces, devised a daring plan to turn the tide of the war. MacArthur's plan called for an amphibious landing at Incheon, a strategic port city well behind enemy lines. The Incheon landing, carried out on September 15, 1950, was a risky gamble, but it proved to be a brilliant tactical success. The UN forces, taking the North Koreans completely by surprise, were able to secure the port and establish a beachhead. The Incheon landing cut the North Korean supply lines and forced the KPA to retreat northward in disarray. The tide of the war had turned in favor of the UN forces. Section 6. China enters the fray. As UN and South Korean forces pushed northward toward the 38th parallel, they encountered a new and formidable enemy, the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, or PVA. China, fearing that the UN advance posed a threat to its security, had secretly intervened in the war, sending hundreds of thousands of troops across the Yalu River into North Korea. The Chinese intervention, which caught the UN forces off guard, dramatically altered the course of the war. The Chinese intervention transformed the Korean War from a limited conflict between North and South Korea into a major confrontation between the United States and its allies and the Communist bloc led by the Soviet Union and China. The Chinese entry into the war, coupled with the harsh winter conditions, forced the UN forces to retreat southward, abandoning their hopes of unifying Korea under UN auspices. Section 7. Stalemate and Attrition. The Chinese intervention in the Korean War led to a bloody stalemate that lasted for over 2 years. Both sides dug in along a heavily fortified line near the 38th parallel, engaging in brutal trench warfare reminiscent of World War I. Neither side was able to achieve a decisive victory, and the war settled into a grinding war of attrition. The stalemate in Korea highlighted the limitations of military force in achieving political objectives. Despite the massive deployment of troops and resources, neither side was able to break the deadlock or impose its will on the other. The Korean War, in this sense, became a frustrating and costly exercise in futility. Section 8. A costly war. The Korean War, though often overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War, was a brutal and costly conflict. The war claimed the lives of millions of people, both soldiers and civilians. North and South Korea, the primary battleground, suffered the most, with millions dead and their economies in ruins. The United States, despite its military superiority, also suffered heavy casualties, with over 36,000 American soldiers killed in action. The Korean War also left a legacy of division and mistrust on the Korean Peninsula. The armistice agreement that ended the fighting in 1953 did little to resolve the underlying political differences between North and South Korea. The two Koreas remained divided by a heavily fortified border, a stark reminder of the human cost of the Cold War. Section 9. The Legacy of Division. The Korean War, despite ending in a stalemate, had a profound impact on the Korean Peninsula and the wider world. The war solidified the division of Korea, creating two separate states with vastly different political systems and ideologies. North Korea, under the rule of Kim Il-sung and his successors, became a reclusive and authoritarian state, while South Korea, with US support, transformed itself into a vibrant democracy and an economic powerhouse. The Korean War also intensified the Cold War rivalry, as the United States and the Soviet Union provided military and economic support to their respective Korean allies. The war demonstrated the dangers of proxy wars, in which superpowers could become embroiled in costly and protracted conflicts without directly confronting each other. Section 10. A frozen conflict. The Korean War is often referred to as a forgotten war. Sandwiched between World War II and the Vietnam War, it tends to receive less attention in historical accounts. However, the Korean War was a pivotal event in the Cold War, shaping the geopolitical landscape of East Asia and highlighting the human cost of ideological conflicts. The Korean War, despite ending in an armistice in 1953, never officially ended. A peace treaty was never signed, and the two Koreas technically remain at war. The demilitarized zone, a heavily fortified border, stretches across the Korean peninsula, a stark reminder of the enduring legacy of the Korean War. The Korean War, therefore, serves as a cautionary tale about the enduring consequences of conflict and the importance of diplomacy in resolving international disputes.